At first, it was just curiosity. When wealthy Russian women arrived in the Philippines, blonde, elegant, polished in ways that came from growing up in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, and other cities where sophistication is as common as snow, they saw Filipino men as something entirely foreign. Not undesirable, not strange, just different. A contrast so sharp that it created both fascination and hesitation. They came expecting beaches, islands, sun, and perhaps a break from the heaviness of Russian life. But they didn't expect the way Filipino men carried themselves. Relaxed, smiling, warm in a way that seemed to melt the cold air they had brought with them. They didn't expect the gentle eyes, the calm patience, the unspoken assurance that everything would be okay. Some of these women were escaping stress. Some were running from heartbreak. Some simply wanted a vacation where nobody expected them to be perfect, flawless, or emotionally bulletproof. But none of them expected what happened next, because slowly, quietly, a feeling began forming inside them. Not dramatic, not instant, more like a sunrise, slowly revealing light they didn't realize they needed. At first, it was confusing. Why were they paying attention to how Filipino men smiled? Why were they noticing the softness in their voices, the way they spoke kindly even when frustrated, the way they treated strangers like potential friends? The women didn't talk about it openly. They weren't even sure how to explain it to themselves. Many of them had come from cultures where men rarely expressed affection without alcohol, where small talk was short and stiff, where masculinity was measured by hardness rather than warmth. Filipino men were different. They listened without interrupting. They joked without trying to impress. They cared without asking for anything in return. They helped without bragging. They protected quietly, gently, without ever making the woman feel small. It was difficult for the Russian women to admit, even privately, that they were being drawn in. They had grown up surrounded by men who were tall, muscular, intimidating, full of fire and intensity. And yes, that fire was attractive, but it was also exhausting. The emotional distance, the pride, the hardness, it wore them down in ways they never acknowledged out loud. In the Philippines, the contrast was so sharp it felt unreal. The first real shift happened not in a dramatic love story, but in something simple. A group of Russian tourists missed a bus connection in Bohol and stood under the scorching sun, confused and frustrated. No one was speaking English around them. They were preparing for another hour of discomfort, heat, and waiting. Then a Filipino man walked up with a bottle of cold water, offered it gently and said, "Relax lang po, we help you. No problem." The women were stunned, not because of the water, but because of the tone. Calm, warm, caring, not flirtatious, not strategic, just genuinely kind. Minutes later, without being asked, he arranged a tricycle to take them to their destination. He negotiated the price on their behalf, made sure they weren't overcharged, and even explained which spots were safe and which weren't. He made sure they didn't get lost. He didn't ask for money. He didn't try to make small talk. He simply wanted to help. That was the moment something flickered inside them. Back home, they were used to independence, to handling everything alone, to being strong because they had to be. Russian society admired resilience, toughness, survival. Their beauty made heads turn, yes, but it didn't make their hearts feel safe. Filipino men didn't make them feel admired. They made them feel protected. Not controlled, protected. There was a difference. The women felt a strange warmth settling inside them, something they'd nearly forgotten how to feel. But that wasn't enough yet to attract them romantically. Attraction is more complicated than kindness. It needs repetition, patterns, consistency, small gestures that slowly stack on top of each other until the feeling becomes undeniable. The second shift happened with humor. Russians do laugh, but their humor is often dark, dry, sarcastic. Filipino humor, on the other hand, was a whole universe of silliness, unexpected wordplay, exaggerated reactions, jokes that made absolutely no sense but somehow made everyone laugh anyway. Russian women found themselves laughing in ways they hadn't laughed in years. Not polite laughter, not controlled, elegant laughter. Real laughter, the kind that shakes the shoulders and breaks through walls of stress. And who made them laugh the most? Filipino men. Effortless humor, goofy jokes, playful teasing, not intimidating, in, not aggressive, just light. At first, the women didn't take it seriously. They thought it was just island vibes making everything feel better. They thought maybe it was the escape from their cold, structured world. They didn't think it meant anything deeper. But then they started noticing something they couldn't ignore. Filipino men looked at them differently. Not like trophies, not like opportunities, not like objects to conquer, not like burdens to compete with. They looked at them like people, like equals, like women worthy of gentleness and deep respect. And that respect wasn't just in actions. It was in the small details. The way a Filipino man would slow down to match their walking pace. The way he would shield them from the sun without announcing it. The way he would keep an eye on their belongings without being asked. The way he would talk to them with sincerity, not arrogance. The way he remembered their preferences, even when they didn't remember telling him. Respect for these women had always been something they had to fight for. Here, it was given freely. Still, attraction didn't hit all at once. It grew quietly, like soft waves touching the shore. The third shift happened when they saw how Filipino men treated their families. In Russia, especially wealthy circles, emotional distance between parents and children was normal. Affection existed, but it wasn't always shown. Many Russian women grew up hearing that emotions were weaknesses, that softness was dangerous, that love was something you guarded tightly behind walls of strength and control. But in the Philippines, affection wasn't hidden. It was worn openly, freely, almost proudly. They saw Filipino men hug their mothers, carry their younger siblings, send money home not out of obligation, but love, take care of their grandparents with patience, share food without thinking twice, laugh with cousins like they were best friends. Russian women watched this with quiet fascination. It challenged everything they thought they understood about masculinity, maturity, and strength. Here, strength wasn't measured by silence or coldness. It was measured by kindness, by how well a man protected the people he loved, by how well he handled life's difficulties with a smile instead of bitterness. This was new to them. Strange, intriguing, beautiful. But most importantly, it was magnetic. Slowly, a realization formed inside the women, not as a loud confession, but as a soft truth they could no longer deny. Filipino men weren't just kind. They weren't just funny. They weren't just respectful. They were different in a way they didn't know they needed. A different kind of masculinity, a different kind of presence, a different kind of emotional safety. It wasn't about height, muscles, or wealth. It wasn't about accents or culture or skin color. It was something deeper, something they felt when they weren't even trying to feel anything. And the more time they spent in the Philippines, the more that quiet attraction grew. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't fireworks. It was warmth, slow, steady, undeniable. Something inside them whispered, "This feels right." They didn't understand it yet. They didn't admit it yet, but they felt it. And that was the beginning. As days turned into weeks, and for some women, months, the feeling that started as curiosity began transforming into something deeper. Not yet love, but something that unsettled them in a strangely pleasant way. They were used to control, order, structure. Russian life, especially for the wealthy, often demanded discipline, schedules, responsibilities, pressure from family, pressure from society, pressure even from themselves to be perfect. But the Philippines had its own rhythm, and Filipino men moved naturally with it. Slow when life needed softness, fast when danger came, calm in chaos, light in heaviness. It was a rhythm foreign to the Russian women, yet comforting in a way no one warned them about. The shift became clearer the more they watched Filipino men interact with life, not just with them. They noticed how Filipino men navigated stress differently. In Russia, stress was expressed through silence, gritted teeth, harsh tones, or emotional withdrawal. But Filipino men, they cracked jokes in the middle of problems. They smiled even when tired. They found small solutions instead of magnifying big issues. They adapted. They improvised. They survived with humor instead of bitterness. And that ability was unbelievably attractive. There was something deeply masculine about calmness under pressure, and something deeply comforting about the way Filipino men refused to let negativity dominate the room. It made the Russian women feel safe in a new, refreshing way. But what surprised them the most was how Filipino men handled conflict. One night, in a resort in Panglao, a group of Russian women witnessed a small misunderstanding between two locals over a coconut delivery. Back home, an argument would escalate quickly. Raised voices, sharp words, pride battling pride until someone walked away bitter or angry. But here, it ended with a laugh, a handshake, and a shared plate of snacks. The Russian women stared, almost confused. How could a man be firm without being aggressive? How could he stand his ground without turning cold? How could he win the argument but still make the other person feel respected? It was a masculinity they weren't used to. A gentle strength, a calm confidence. The kind that didn't need to dominate to prove itself. The kind that wasn't threatened by kindness. Some of the women admitted, very quietly to themselves, that they liked this. Not loudly, not dramatically, just internally, privately, as if confessing a small secret. That slow attraction became more noticeable in small, intimate moments, unexpected moments that caught them off guard. A Filipino man fixing a flat tricycle tire while laughing at his own bad luck. A man carrying heavy groceries for an elderly stranger even though he wasn't asked. A man stepping aside to let someone else take shelter under an umbrella. A man working 2 jobs but still finding time to smile and say, "Good morning, Po?" These things weren't done to impress anyone. They weren't performances. They were just natural habits shaped by culture, community, and the Filipino way of seeing the world. And that natural goodness, it shined. The Russian women found themselves softening, not just toward Filipino men, but toward life. They took deeper breaths. They smiled more. They let themselves relax. It was as if the country itself was teaching them how to be human again. Not the strong, cold, unshakable human they were expected to be, but the warm, open, imperfect one they secretly wanted to be. But the real change, the one that shifted attraction into something more real, happened through small interactions. It began with conversations. Not long, complicated conversations, but simple ones. Filipino men asked questions out of curiosity, not interrogation. "Are you enjoying here? You like the food? Where you want to go next?" And they listened, truly listened. They didn't rush the women. They didn't talk over them. They didn't make conversations about themselves. They didn't correct or belittle their opinions. The Russian women weren't used to this level of emotional presence. They were used to men who dominated conversations, who raised their voices to be heard, who filled silence with opinions and authority. Here, silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a space where 2 people could breathe together. The women noticed how Filipino men talked about dreams. Not always big dreams, not always money, power, success, but dreams about family, stability, helping their parents, raising good children, living peacefully, being happy with simple joys. The Russian women came from a world where success was measured by luxury, achievements, status. But here, success was measured by happiness, by contentment, by the ability to laugh at life instead of fighting it endlessly. Slowly, their values shifted. They began questioning the life they had back home, the pressure, the hardness, the constant competition, the need to be perfect, the emotional distance. They realized that being strong all the time was exhausting, and that maybe strength didn't need to look like ice. Maybe it could look like sunshine, too. Then came the 4th shift, physical attraction. It didn't happen instantly. It wasn't like movies where lightning struck and sparks flew the first time eyes met. No, it happened slowly, subtly, almost invisibly. Attraction grew from personality, from kindness, from humor, from gentleness. It grew from watching Filipino men dance awkwardly at fiestas but not care about looking foolish. It grew from watching them handle babies with tenderness. It grew from the way they played basketball with friendly trash talk instead of aggression. It grew from how they treated animals. It grew from how they respected elders. It grew from their humility. And when attraction finally arrived, it didn't feel sudden. It felt right. Many of these women admitted to themselves, quietly, shyly, that they started noticing things they didn't expect to find attractive. The warm brown skin, the bright, sincere eyes, the relaxed posture, the calm, soft-spoken voice, the subtle confidence, the easy smile. It was beauty they had never been taught to admire. Back home, beauty standards were tall, angular, sharp. Here, beauty was warmth, softness, lightness, and the women found themselves drawn to it with surprising intensity. But they still didn't fully understand it. Why were they feeling this way? Why was this attraction growing as naturally as the tropical sunset? Why did they suddenly feel comfortable around Filipino men in ways they never felt around men from their own country? The answer became clearer the more they observed. Filipino men didn't chase. They didn't pressure. They didn't suffocate with intensity. They didn't try to claim anyone. Instead, they created space. Space to breathe, space to relax, space to be vulnerable without fear, space to feel safe. And safety, the women realized, was the foundation of attraction. Many of them carried emotional wounds, relationships that demanded too much, expectations that weighed heavily, loneliness disguised as independence. In the Philippines, they found something they didn't even know they were searching for: emotional rest. Not rest from life, rest from the pressure to perform, rest from the pressure to be strong, rest from the pressure to be perfect. Filipino men didn't just treat them kindly, they treated them like women who deserved gentleness, softness, care, understanding. And that made the women feel feminine in a way they hadn't felt in years. Not weaker, more whole. The slow attraction wasn't just romantic, it was healing. Some of the Russian women found themselves walking differently. Lighter steps, softer expressions. They dressed more comfortably. They wore less makeup. They laughed more. They didn't feel the need to impress anyone. They simply existed, and it felt enough. The fifth shift came from something deeper: emotional compatibility. Filipino men valued loyalty. They valued family. They valued small joys over big egos. They valued partnership, not competition. They valued kindness more than pride. These values matched what many Russian women secretly longed for, but rarely found. They didn't want to be in constant battle with their partners. They didn't want love that felt like war. They didn't want a relationship where both had to prove who was stronger. They wanted peace. And peace was exactly what Filipino men radiated. But the women began noticing something even more powerful, something that surprised them. Filipino men loved deeply, not loudly, not dramatically, not possessively, but wholeheartedly. They treated relationships with seriousness. They valued commitment. They didn't give love casually. It was something meaningful, sacred. This sincerity was magnetic. The women felt seen, felt valued, felt cherished in ways that were new to them. And that newness wasn't frightening. It was refreshing. By this point, the slow attraction had become undeniable. Not yet love, not yet confession, but something real. Something that pulled them gently, quietly, toward a future they were beginning to imagine. A future where warmth replaced cold, where laughter replaced pressure, where emotional safety replaced emotional distance, where kindness replaced competition. A future where love didn't feel like battle, but like home. And as more Russian women found themselves drawn to Filipino men, a surprising pattern was forming, one that no one fully understood yet. But they were about to. As months passed, the quiet attraction growing inside these Russian women began shifting into something deeper, something that no one expected, not even them. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It wasn't just curiosity. It wasn't just fascination with a different culture. It was a question forming slowly in their hearts. Why do Filipino men make us feel this way? The answer revealed itself through experiences layered one on top of another, not in one big dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small, honest ones. It appeared in the way Filipino men protected without controlling, in the way they offered help without expecting anything in return, in the way they paid attention to emotions, not just words, in the way they valued loyalty like something sacred, in the way they made the women feel safe, not physically, but emotionally. The world rarely talks about emotional safety because it sounds soft, invisible, unimportant. But these women learned that emotional safety was the foundation of real attraction, for women, for men, for anyone. It was the feeling of being understood without having to explain everything, the feeling of being accepted without needing to impress, the feeling of being able to relax without fear of being judged. And somehow, Filipino men created this feeling naturally, effortlessly. The Russian women didn't understand how at first. Their own culture taught them to be strong, guarded, careful with vulnerability, cautious with trust. But with Filipino men, their guards slowly, quietly, lowered. Maybe it was the warmth, maybe it was the humor, maybe it was the kindness, maybe it was the unshakable positivity even in the worst situations. Or maybe it was that Filipino men didn't try to dominate them, they tried to connect. The women realized something powerful. Filipino men listened with their hearts, not just their ears. They paid attention to tone. They sensed when someone was sad. They comforted through presence, not lectures. They offered solutions only if asked. They supported through softness, not force. For the Russian women, this was rare. Back home, expressing vulnerability often meant inviting criticism or judgment. Here, expressing vulnerability meant being held gently, emotionally, not physically. This shift felt revolutionary. Some of the women described it as feeling like their souls were unclenching for the first time in years, that they didn't need to be cold to be respected, that they didn't need to be tough to be valued, that they didn't need to guard every emotion to avoid being hurt. Filipino men didn't make them feel weak. They made them feel human. And because of that, attraction deepened into admiration, and admiration deepened into genuine affection. But the biggest transformation came from something unexpected: respect. Not respect demanded, but respect given freely. Filipino men respected boundaries. They respected independence. They respected opinions, even when different. They respected the women's goals, dreams, careers. They respected emotional needs without shame. This respect was something the Russian women rarely experienced with men back home, where gender roles could be rigid, expectations heavy, and emotional expression limited. In the Philippines, the respect felt natural, sincere, unforced. They noticed how Filipino men treated women in general: mothers, sisters, strangers, elders. There was a softness, a protectiveness, a reverence even, that came from culture, religion, upbringing, and values. A gentle masculine pride in caring for those they loved. And that softness was incredibly attractive. But something even more surprising began happening. These women started changing too. Their perspective shifted from, "Why are Filipino men different?" to, "What if this kind of love is what I've been missing all along?" They found themselves imagining futures they had never considered before. What if love didn't have to be painful? What if relationships didn't have to be battles? What if partners could laugh through problems together? What if masculinity didn't need to be cold to be strong? What if a simple, happy life could be more fulfilling than a rich, complicated one? These questions whispered to them during sunsets, during long jeepney rides, during quiet mornings by the sea. And with these questions came realizations, real insights that gave the story its value. They realized that love thrives not in luxury, but in emotional connection. They realized that wealth provides comfort, but kindness provides safety. They realized that physical attraction pulls you in, but emotional intelligence keeps you there. They realized that compatibility isn't about culture, it's about values. They realized that the strongest men are often the softest inside. They realized that love grows slowly, quietly, when no one is trying to force it. These lessons reshaped their perception of what a good man truly is. But there was still one final piece of the mystery. The question that started this whole documentary-style exploration. What is the secret of Filipino men that makes Russian women slowly fall in love? At first, the women thought the secret was humor. Then they thought it was kindness, then calmness, then gentleness, then loyalty, then emotional intelligence. But as the story continued, they uncovered the real answer. It wasn't one trait, it wasn't one behavior, it wasn't one cultural difference, it was balance. Filipino men embodied a kind of balance rare in the world. strong without being harsh, playful without being childish, gentle without being weak, respectful without being distant, confident without being arrogant, romantic without being dramatic, protective without being controlling. This balance created a type of masculinity that felt whole, a masculinity that felt safe, a masculinity that felt warm, a masculinity that felt trustworthy. For women who grew up with cold environments, strict expectations, societal pressure, and emotional restraint, this was magnetic. It was healing. And as more Russian women shared their experiences, a pattern became undeniable. They weren't falling in love because Filipino men were exotic or different. They were falling in love because Filipino men offered something rare, a space where they could finally be themselves, a space where independence was respected, a space where emotions were valued, a space where vulnerability wasn't punished, a space where love wasn't a war, a space where they could breathe. The Philippines didn't just change the way they saw men, it changed the way they saw love. And Filipino men, without trying, without pretending, showed them that love doesn't need to be ice cold to be real. It can be warm like sunlight. It can be gentle like waves. It can be steady like the slow rhythm of island life. It can grow quietly, sincerely, without pressure or fear. In the end, that's the real value of this story. Not that Russian women fall in love with Filipino men. But why? Because Filipino men remind them of a truth they forgot in the coldness of life. That love is supposed to feel safe, warm, simple, human. And when a woman, no matter where she comes from, no matter how wealthy or beautiful or strong, finally experiences this kind of warmth, her heart slowly, naturally, inevitably begins to move toward it. Not because she chose it, but because her soul recognized it. A love that feels like home,